Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast, and today I'm joined by Hunter, who's often here with me, and we have another guest, Philip Moore. Philip, Hunter, thanks for being here.
Philip is my guest, and so he is our guest.
That's right. I'm staying in the Hunter mansion.
Well, I think our guests are pretty well acquainted with myself and Hunter, but Philip, would you introduce yourself? Just tell our listeners a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Philip Moore. I'm originally from Northern Ireland. I'm 53 years old, married to Rachel. We've got 5 children. When we were in Northern Ireland, Rachel was a barrister, which is what you guys call an attorney, I think. And I was a French teacher. And then we had been married for about 9 years and been working those jobs for about 9 years when we felt the conviction to A, go into pastoral ministry, and B, to do that in France. And so 9 years into our marriage, we moved with Julia, Anna and Abigail, our 3 children at the time, to the Paris area. And then subsequently we've added Theo and Zoe to our family. And we've been in Paris for nearly 20 years now. And essentially what we came to do was to pastor. I was a pastor, and Rachel was very involved alongside me. And then planting churches and leading church planting in the Paris area and in France. So.
Philip is the Europe director for Acts 29 Network, so I've gotten to work with him in that capacity.
Yeah.
And you've been in the Paris area for 20 years, but recently you moved from the suburbs. Is that the right way to say it? You're in the suburbs of Paris? To the city.
That's right.
Tell us where you were before moving into what most people would think of as the city of Paris. Where outside of Paris were you?
So everything is, connected. So essentially where I moved to was a Baptist church on the east side of the Paris region. That Baptist church had been planted in the 1980s through a joint venture by American, Irish and English missionaries and some Canadians as well. And that was called Marne-la-Vallée 2000. I'm telling this background because it kind of all feeds into the overall story. So Marne-la-Vallée 2000 was a church planting project that these missionaries had come up with, where they wanted to plant 25 churches along the River Marne by the year 2000.
How would someone like me pronounce what you just said?
Marne-la-Vallée.
Marne-la-Vallée.
2000.
2000.
Means 2000.
Yeah.
2000 means 2000.
So you guys, if you want to look that up, you can look that up. Marne-de-Vallée, D-E-U-X.
That's correct.
That's 2000, M-I-L-L-E.
That's right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's the
Marne
Valley.
Yeah, the Marne Valley. So the essentially
people.
what happened was, and this is kind of, I know that you kind of like this kind of detail. So the west hand side of Paris was developed and very bourgeois and chic, because the prevailing winds would have pushed the factory fumes to the east. And so therefore the west was developed and the east was undeveloped. And then of course with modern technology coming in and there are fewer factories around to push the smoke anywhere. The east was then beginning to be developed, but essentially along the Marne Valley there were just towns after towns after towns with 0 evangelical churches. And it's very hard for people in the States to imagine that a town without an evangelical church. But it not only exists in France, but the majority of towns don't have an evangelical church in France. And that could be a town of 10,000 or 20,000 or 25,000 or 50,000 people. It doesn't matter, just 0 evangelical churches. And so those Americans, when they arrived in the 1960s, 1970s, they started to evangelize, started to be involved in church, and then noticed that in terms of the map of Paris, all along the Marne Valley to the east, there were no evangelical churches. And so the church that I came to pastor was a part of that project. It had been planted in 1980. And was still going strong in 2006 when we arrived. And interestingly, we as a family had been praying for those churches because our denomination, our Baptist denomination, was involved in those early church planting forays into the east of Paris. So I came actually, and it kind of came full circle. So I came to pastor a church that had been planted. And I think my mum, my dad and my brother had been part of a missions trip, maybe even to that area at any rate. So it was kind of really neat for me to arrive back there and to pastor a church in that context. And then when we arrived, the church was in the middle of planting another church. So it had kind of a whole plan set out. And so I supervised the end of that project and in fact accelerated a bit. And so a church was planted 30 minutes to the south of where we were. And 30 members of an 80-member church left. It's kind of really interesting to kind of compare and contrast what happens in the States, what happens elsewhere in terms of church planting. But all those people left. And in fact, the people who left were the treasurer, the president, the secretary, the Sunday school workers, the elders, the big givers, to the extent that the church that was planted supported the mother church financially for 3 years.
Wow.
So like if you're listening and you're in the throes of church planting on either side of that equation, just kind of cast your mind to that reality. And so I was left with a church of about 50 people that was being financially supported by the church plant that we just sent out. But it was really a really exciting time, because the church that was left was a church that was ready to be launched into evangelism and mission locally, to concentrate again on their mission, which was a local mission as opposed to a church plant which was half an hour away. And so it galvanized the church, and I was a new pastor, naive and full of good ideas, as I thought, but being trusted as well by people to carry those ideas out. So it was a great opportunity for me and Rachel to oversee a church plant, to be in a church, and then to start thinking about, well, the town next to us still doesn't have a church. And the town next to us was Val d'Europe. Val d'Europe was the 5 towns that were combined into one town to host Disneyland Paris. So Disneyland Paris was planted there, and that town, which was projected to be 50,000 people and more, had 0 evangelical churches. And so somebody in the church came to me and said, we need to plant a church in Val d'Europe. And I said, great idea, let's do it. And so we did. It wasn't straightforward, it wasn't easy. It's through that experience that I got to know Acts 39, because I needed help to kind of think through church planting and be assessed as a church planter myself. But that was essentially what we did from 2006 through 2022. And so we were there in the east part of the Paris area, pastoring, planting, training planters, sending planters out. And it was kind of a really exciting and blessed time over there in the east part of the Paris suburbs.
So then in 2022, is that when you moved into Paris?
It's when the idea started to emerge. We moved actually in 2023. But the origin story, I know you guys are talking about origin stories.
Origin stories, yeah.
In Fellowship Denver. And it's super important, I think, to realize where you've come from and why you're where you are. And in some senses, looking back allows you to see with clarity where you're going. The origin story of the church plant in Paris is somewhat tragic, in the sense that, as you know, 2020 was COVID. 2020 was a bad year in many, many ways, even politically and socioeconomically in the States and elsewhere. It was a really kind of difficult year. And part of the difficulty of that year for me was the tragic death of a very close ministry friend called Edward Nelson. So what happened was that Edward was an impetus for many church planting projects in France, but also particularly in the Paris area. And one of the churches that he was concerned about encouraging to do more church planting was one of the old historic Baptist churches in Paris. It's called Rue de Sèvres, and the pastor, very good friend of mine, Mathieu Saunders. And because it was COVID, nobody could see each other very frequently. But during 2 confinements, like in between 2, Edward said to Matthew, let's meet up for coffee. They met up for coffee. Edward was very kind of, you know Edward, you remember Edward?
I remember
He was
Edward.
very kind of straightforward and direct, not to say tactless. And he would say to Matthew, you guys, between 2000 and 2010, were very involved in church planting. Between 2000 and 2020, you haven't done anything for church planting. You guys need to get back in the saddle, church planting wise. Yeah. And Matthew is very sensitive and very reflective and very wise. And so I think he kind of listened to Edward, but was thinking, okay, well, we've got lots to do, and thank you for your input. But as I say, that was a conversation that happened between 2 confinements. Then Edward went on holidays to the Alps and died tragically in a climbing accident. And so all of a sudden, this conversation that Matthew had had with Edward was no longer just a conversation which he could take or leave. It was the last words that Edward ever said to him, essentially. So that kind of started to ruminate with Matthew. And Matthew and I are in a kind of a group of 3 pastors. And so we were meeting a year after that in 22 now, a year and a half afterwards. And he was recounting the story. And then he said to me, would you ever consider joining our church with a view to planting another church in the 5th district of Paris? I'm condensing that part of it a little bit, but that was the essence of what he said. I'd been thinking about moving to Paris for a while. It had always been in our kind of thoughts that Rachel and I might end up in Paris at some point. But we couldn't do it without ecclesiological legitimacy. We couldn't just kind of parachute in and say, hi, we're going to plant a church, because that's not how I view church planting. It's a kind of an ecclesiologically important thing to do. And so it needs to have a local church in principle behind that movement. So when the local church asked us to come in and plant a church, that was what I was waiting for, and that really kind of resonated with me and with Rachel. So we prayed, we consulted, we thought, we worked it out, and got in touch with good partners in the States, including Hunter, crucially, and said, here, this is the idea, this is the possibility. It'll only work if we can actually move into a flat in the Fifth and actually set up. And so Hunter and other churches got alongside us and said, okay, we'll provide the finances for the first 2 years so you can move into the flat and start to explore what it would look like to plant a church in the 5th district. And so in the summer of 2023, that's what we were able to do. And so we started doing what we call the exegesis of the area, and working out what it would like to plant a church in the 5th district of Paris. And so our origin story is many things. All of those streams that I've just been talking about flowing together to bring us to this point. I mean, there's many other things I could say, but at least those things, for me, describe the divine and human aspects of what it means to get from where you were to where God wants you to be. And we've got a deep conviction that what God is doing is part of the fruit of Edward's tragic death. Because he died in that way. I remember when he died, the logical human thing to do is to say, how on earth can that help the gospel in France? You know, we've just subtracted a great preacher, a great church planter, a great encourager, a great mentor, somebody who was active and moving forward. But when he died, I remember thinking of that verse in Philippians chapter 1 where Paul says he's in prison, and he says to the Philippians, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. And you think, how can Paul being in prison serve to advance the gospel? And it's actually totally counterintuitive. But then Paul goes on to describe that the impact of him being in prison was that the guards in prison were converted, the church that was watching him was encouraged to evangelize, and all the ramifications of him being in prison meant that the gospel advanced. And so I take a great solace from that Edward's death, though tragic, actually produced gospel fruit beyond his death in a way that to me seems to be miraculous in the sovereign providence of God. So that's a long answer, but there you go.
I appreciate the backstory. And you mentioned the 5th arrondissement, the 5th district of Paris, which is sometimes called the Latin Quarter.
That's right.
It's on the left bank for people who know Paris. That's the left bank of the Seine River.
That's right.
And tell us what it's like. It's got a lot of students, universities.
Oh yeah. So the reason that it was the kind of the place that we picked along with Matthew and the Sending Church for the church plant is because, number one, it was one of the only districts in Paris, arrondissement, that had no evangelical church, which is a phenomenal kind of thing to think through, because you think, if there's any place that would need an evangelical church that would be ripe for one, it'd be there, the place where there's all the young people and all these students, and yet there was no church plant there. Sometimes you kind of have those kinds of moments where the penny drops and you think, well, why has nobody ever done this? But nobody had ever done it. So there we go. People had tried actually to do church plants in and around the 5th, but none had really stuck in terms of reaching the population. So that was the first thing. So the 5th district had no evangelical church, according to our understanding of what that means. And the second thing is that it's ripe for a gospel presence. You mentioned the students. So the Sorbonne is right there. So you've been in our flat, you know that we look out opposite the Sorbonne. So from our front,
to the gates of it.
Yeah. So the students flock around where we are. But it's not only the Sorbonne, it's the law schools, it's the elite schools for future prime ministers and presidents. So Macron, our current president, attended Lycée Henri IV, which is a stone's throw from where we live, and where Rachel actually had a job helping disabled students, physically disabled students. The ENS, which is the elite school, our intern last year was from the ENS and actually was Edward's son. So it was a beautiful thing to have Edward represented through his son in our church plant. Anyway, so that is a massive population. There's 80,000 students going through the fifth every single day, and most of them have no clue about the gospel, and have never read the Bible. We've had amazing opportunities to present the gospel to some of these elite students. And I remember one particular time when we had 40 of them in a room together. Only one of them was Christian, and the other 39, I asked them, whoever here has read the Bible? 0 people had read the Bible. I said, who's actually held a Bible in their hands? Nobody had held a Bible in their hands. And of course, we'd bought Bibles for the day so that we could distribute them. And so we distributed them, and it was essentially a mix between a kind of a Bible event and an educational event, because these people were philosophy students who wanted to find out about what the Bible said about a particular theme. So I went through the Bible, and they were there with their laptops, the Bible, taking references, and reading Genesis 1:28 for the first time. God created mankind in his image, male and female he created them. They were discovering that. They were discovering what it meant to sin against God, to rebel against him, to lose the image of God. They were discovering about idolatry. They were working out what it meant for Jesus to be the image of God, etc., etc. They were discovering everything from scratch, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, because those 80,000 students, we had 40 of them in the room, but if we had 80,000, all of them would have been in the same boat. Basically, nobody has held a Bible.
That was representative.
That was representative
people there.
Of the people there. That it's not just that they don't know the basic tenets of Christian doctrine. It's that they are totally biblically illiterate. They haven't ever held a Bible in their hands. They don't know a single Bible verse.
If that's sort of the nature of the people, especially the students you encounter, do they have any assumptions about Christianity?
They do. It's a great question, because they come from obviously a westernized, Christianized context where the Catholic Church has been dominant for a long time. And so in terms of the iconography of the kind of surrounding culture, it's all Christian. I remember I was doing something on just leading up to Easter on the cross of Christ. And it's something that John Stott references in his book, The Cross of Christ. But essentially all churches are constructed or were constructed along the lines of a cruciform shape. And so if you look at a church from above, you see the cross. And so I just took an aerial shot of the fifth from the internet and put it up on the screen and showed everybody all the crosses of the churches in the fifth. Like, there's tons of them, and there's crosses everywhere. There's religious imagery everywhere. People know about Jesus. They don't know much about him, but that's what they associate with the Christian God. They know that the cross is something important. All of their holidays are referenced by religious holidays, so Christmas and Easter, but not just Christmas and Easter, but for example, the Ascension and the Assumption of Mary, and all kinds of Pentecost. They're all public holidays, and so all of their surrounding atmosphere is Christian, but they don't have any basic knowledge of the Christian faith and the Christian story, or indeed how indebted they are as Western people to the Christian faith, which is why in the next season of the church, so we've been in existence for about a year now, but in France the back to school is really, really big, so they do the rentrée, and so I'm preparing a series of sermons based on Glenn Scrivener's book, The Air We Breathe, where we're going to just go through how Christian their world is without they knowing it, and trying to show them, if they believe that, the only reason that they have to believe that essentially is the Christian God and the Christian story, and not just in vague terms, but in specific gospel-centered terms. So the way in which Jesus reveals God has dramatically impacted the way we see people, and I want them to grasp that. So essentially the first few sermons that we're going to be doing in September, October are going to be a kind of apologetic and drawing people to recognize that although they live in a Christian world, they haven't recognized the foundations of that Christian world that they're living in.
When you moved into the fifth, I'm guessing you already had a good picture of the demographics of it. You knew what you were getting into, but is there anything you noticed living there that you didn't know from just observing it from a distance?
We're discovering things every day, and we're trying to assimilate them. the place of appearance and how important appearance is, whether that's kind of physical appearance or what you wear or how you carry yourself or the things you reference, the ways you talk about things. All of those things are very embedded in the culture and sometimes difficult to navigate, and certainly foreign to us, because people who live in the fifth, certainly if they own their flat or their place of residence, and probably even if they just rented, it betokens great wealth and affluence. So you can't be there without belonging to a certain level of society. And so where you take your holidays, where you go to ski, maybe it's the same in Denver, the clothes you wear, the restaurants you eat in, the things you reference in your daily conversation, those things are interesting to observe. And so I think I knew that, but I've experienced that, day to day. And you can spend your time worrying about that kind of stuff and wondering how you're going to kind of overcome some of those obstacles. But when I kind of get into that mindset, I'm reminded of something that somebody once said to me, actually in the context of an Acts 29 planter assessment. And the planter's wife said that mission doesn't start with the name of a city, it starts with the name of a person. Mm. And ultimately that means that mission and what we're trying to do, yes, it's in the fifth and it's in Paris and it's all those things, but essentially these people are people. And so they're people who hurt, they're people who have needs, there are people who have aspirations, there are people whose great material wealth doesn't hide their emotional poverty or their spiritual poverty. So I'm thinking of one person in particular who was connected to us via the school that our children were in, and we were doing a meeting in our office space. Our office space is bang in the centre of the fifth, and we offer it to different institutions to use if they need it. And so the Parents Association of the school wanted to use it, and this particular person was looking at my books, and some of the books were about family, and she said, "Oh, I must talk to you sometime about family because it's not that easy." And so that was maybe a year and a half ago, and bit by bit she circled back around in the conversation, and to the point where she asked me if I would meet with her and her son and try to mediate between her and her son so that she could have a better relationship with her son. And so we met, and that meeting went really well, and she's now saying that the relationship and the ambience at home is much better. So it's really interesting to me that the way into that conversation was simply through presence, availability, and a deep sense that she needed some solutions that weren't being offered.
Having your books on display.
Having my books on display.
Your books on display. I'm hearing you describe two populations: the students, and the people who are full-time, permanent residents of the fifth. They own their flats. I'm guessing those are different populations, but your church is bringing those together under one church.
So I think essentially what we have is we've got the student population, which is about a third of our church, and we've got the young adult, young professional population, which is another third. And then the third would be people in our situation who have children who are more or less grown up or at some stage during school, and who are working those kinds of things out. And so those three populations are well represented in our church, and we're trying to reach all of them because I believe that the gospel will have a transformative effect on people who are right at the start of their career, in the middle of their family choices, at the end of their life. The gospel comes with its message of hope, reconciliation, restoration, forgiveness, etc., etc. It's something I believe will be relevant for everybody.
And when did the church plant actually begin meeting for regular services?
Yeah, we were in Paris from 23 to 25, essentially, to prepare.
You spent 2 years doing groundwork before.
So the first of those years, I was full time with Acts 29, so I couldn't actually do anything other than live there and start to get to know the area. Then after that, we started to have a year to really prepare the launch. So 23-24 was kind of that first year. 24-25 was the second year. And then September 26 was when we launched the church. So the 14th of September, Hunter was across.
I was there that Sunday.
You were that Sunday. And so we launched more or less a year ago now. And so we'll be celebrating our first anniversary on the 13th of September. And And it was really, really amazing. So we had 140 people show up for the launch, and we had champagne and we had all kinds of things, and it was great fun. It was a little bit chaotic as well, but because we weren't expecting that many people. But we launched with a group of 30, and then we had our launch Sunday, which was 140, and then almost immediately we were 60, and since then we've been kind of growing steadily. And I think we're now between 70 and 80 if you count an average Sunday. Obviously, the summer Sundays are different because they are very sparse because everybody leaves Paris for the summer.
We know about summer Sundays too.
But essentially, we're really encouraged with the results so far and the progress so far. But not just that, but the sense of excitement that people have about the church. So the people who are in the church, I really sense that they've got the vision and they want to participate and they want to see people won for Christ. They want to grow in Christ themselves. They want to build this community of vibrant Christian witness in the 5th arrondissement in Paris. So I'm excited to get back to it.
Is there any particular person in your church plant who you would point to and say, this exemplifies like what we were hoping for and praying for?
No, if anybody ever listens to this, they'll be all jealous if I choose one person. There's a number of different categories of people, and so yes, there are people like that. There's a couple. They're actually looking after our dog in our flat at the minute, and they've just really grown as a couple, grown as individuals, are serving in the church really well. He was baptized. She actually heard about the church plant through a gospel coalition thing that I was doing. I was doing it down in Geneva. She heard it. She said, "Oh, I'd love to come to your church. I live in Paris area. Can I come?" I said, "Of course you can come." She brought her husband along. She had been in part of a kind of a Christian cult kind of thing, prosperity gospel, but a little bit kind of darker than that maybe. And so she was coming out of that. He had ideas of Christianity in the past, but never understood the gospel. So they came to the church, and then he was converted and was baptized. So that's a kind of a really great story because you can see a young couple well on the rails now to becoming a mature couple and to have a good family, and it's just beautiful to see that. Other people, there's a nightclub owner who's become a Christian, and so working out how to disciple him. He lives in the 5th. He's great. It's a real challenge as well because there's a bunch of stuff that you've got to work through, and then also his availability is minimal because he's works the weekends and goes to bed at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So how do you disciple that? But that's also really exciting. Who else? So I think there's been 2 or 3 marriages. One of my dreams for the church plant is to see tons of people understand what Christian marriage is, and then to take the step of Christian marriage, and then to found their families and to be a shining light of hope.
These are couples that you're hoping to convince to marry.
Some of them already got married. I'm not hoping to convince any particular couple. I'm just hoping to set up a whole ecosystem where those kinds of things happen regularly.
No, it's a beautiful thing. And we've seen that in the life of our church too, where couples that maybe have been together for a while or they've been dating for a long time, and when you kind of put out there the covenant nature of Christian marriage and what God calls us to, they're like, "Oh,
that's right. Who knew?"
And I'm like, "Let's go,
let's do it." That's right. So like essentially, we've got 3 values in the church plant: truth, beauty, goodness, and those are values that I think are deeply embedded in the Christian faith, and that God has embedded deeply in the heart of every human person. And it's kind of when you look at literature out there, people call them the transcendentals. So truth, beauty, goodness is what everybody actually is looking for. What is true, what is beautiful, and what is good, and how can I be part of it? And so marriage is part of the true, beautiful, and good thing that God has done in the world. As our children, as our many other endeavours that you undertake in the common grace of what God has done for us in creation, and even more so in what God has done for us in redemption. And so I'm just trying to make sure that we talk about these things in such a way that they inspire hope and affection and longing in people's lives, so that when they come to faith in this holistic kind of way. They come to faith knowing that they're sinners and they need to be saved by grace through faith. But they come also as human beings who need to be restored and redeemed into the image of God to live in his world as he intended, and to respond to their creator in the way that he wants them to find in him what it truly means to be human, and to have those kinds of things together and not pulling against each other, but working together, so that my true reconciliation with God through the cross and my true recreation in the image of God by the Spirit are things that are held together and that are celebrated together. So those are the kinds of things we're aiming for.
Well, I've stayed in your home several times.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, in fact, it's a pleasure for me too. I told your son Theo last night when you guys showed up at my house, I should actually probably give him my bed because I've kicked him out of his bed so many times. I should go sleep on the couch tonight, or maybe even sleep in the laundry room.
This is what Theo does when you come.
Several times, yeah. I should just go sleep in my laundry room to punish myself for the number of free nights I've taken on Theo's bed. But what I've noticed is, I'm not the only person in your house. There's a lot of people in and out of your house. You and Rachel have really made your flat a place of ministry, and not just ministry to a few of your friends, but as a place of outreach. So I think it's a great picture of hospitality biblically, and I'm curious what you would say about hospitality, especially to people who may not be outgoing or may not think of themselves as having a big, beautiful home, or they don't love entertaining. What would you say?
Oh, I've thought about this long and hard. When I look at 1 Timothy 3, so which talks about elders and deacons and the mission of God, and when you let that kind of thing settle, as opposed to just being a religious text about religious leaders, it's what it's become, and it's not really what it's meant to be about. Part of the thing that Paul is injecting into that is this idea that people who are going to lead God's family need to be hospitable. But if you dig behind that, what does hospitable mean? It means welcoming the stranger, and anybody else into your home, and providing meals and sustenance and welcome and time. But that implies the ability to do it. You can't say to somebody, hey, be hospitable, if they don't have the means with which to be hospitable. And so, again, you're building in this picture in what Paul is saying to Christian leaders in his day and age, that the kind of people who are going to be called to be leading the flock are the kinds of people who will need to have access to the resources to do that. Sometimes I feel guilty about living in such a beautiful place and having access to such a lovely flat as you've seen. But then when I do have those feelings of, first world guilt, I suppose, I think to myself, this is not that far removed from what Paul is saying in 1 Timothy 3 to people back in his day, where he is expecting them to have the space and the resources to be hospitable. And hospitality back in the day, it cost time, money, effort, and space. You couldn't be hospitable in the absence of those things. And Paul expected those kinds of things of the Christian leaders of the time. So it is really baked into what it means to be doing ministry, I think. And so I often reflect on it. And the ways in which it works and the way it ties into the gospel, for me is simply to say that in the gospel, God has welcomed us to his table. So we were strangers, we were far away, we were unworthy, in fact we were enemies, and God did everything necessary, not only to forgive us what we had done against him, but to establish us in a status before him, a status of welcome stranger. And he even adopted us into his family to give us a seat, a permanent seat at his table, where we could sit and eat with him. That's the big arc of the Bible storyline, that we get to sit at the table of God forever, feasting in his presence. And when you have that in your head, then you know that all that you've been given on earth has been given to you so that you can get into that gospel flow of welcome and provision. Not everybody can do that. So as you say, some people could be listening to me and thinking, I don't have the resources or the space or the ways to be hospitable. And that's why I think God gives these tasks to the church at large and to church leaders in particular to make sure that they're happening. So I can't expect the student who can barely get by on the student grant that he has and the student accommodation that he has, which might be a 4 meter squared bedroom, to be hospitable in the way that I'm able to be hospitable with my situation. But what I can do is invite that student into my home and let him or her participate in the overall welcome that the church provides to those who don't yet know Christ or to those who need to be welcomed. What we can do as a church is to make sure that we set up our church services in such a way that welcome and hospitality is part of what we do, and so include people in that welcome hospitality. And so we meet, as you know, from 9:30 to 10 before the church service, and we provide people with the best croissant in Paris and good coffee, and we have people there to welcome them. And so the attitude and the mentality and the mindset of hospitality should be everybody's. The practice should be everybody's to the extent that they're able, but the responsibility for setting up the structures whereby people who don't have the means by themselves to be hospitable can participate in the hospitality of the church. That's the leader's responsibility to make sure it's happening. But the overall picture that emerges when you've got those things straight in your head is a welcoming church where people are welcomed not on the basis of their status or their background or their ability or their faith or lack of it, but welcomed, as James said, basically on the basis of the fact that they're there, that they're created in the image of God. And so no partiality. The rich or the poor or the clever or the not so clever or the educated or the not so educated, they're all welcomed because there's only one glorious person, and that's Jesus. And everybody else is just welcome to his table.
You said something right there that gets my creative juices flowing, which you're really describing hospitality as a whole church project,
Exactly.
not just, and those who maybe have the means or the resources or the space to be hospitable can partner with other people in that. You mentioned partnering with students. I saw that in action when I was staying with you this summer, which was before you had launched Sunday services. You were having gatherings from time to time where you would get the core group that was committed to helping start the church together in your home. And I remember one of those evenings, I had a great conversation with a student who had been invited by another student. He was not part of the core team. I think he wasn't even sure where he was in his faith. And he had been invited to that. And he probably could not, or, it would have been different for him to have invited his friend just to his own flat.
That's right. Yes.
But to invite him to hey, come meet my pastor, come meet the people that I'm in community with. We're going to have a big meal.
Yeah.
It was a great picture of the church doing hospitality together.
That's right. And that's, so like, just to circle back around to the idea of partnership and hospitality and mission. You know that flat is provided for by partners in the States who help us finance it. Hopefully at some point we'll get to the point where the church itself can finance the accommodation for its pastors. That's a great thing to be aiming for. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it'll happen, I think, over the next 10 years. But in the meantime, having partners across the world who have a vision for what we're doing and who know that kind of expense in the faith is not just justified, but in some senses it's essential. To have this kind of space where you can do these kinds of things, it's not a luxury. It's part of an embodiment of the mission that we have. And in the absence of the flat and in the absence of a good place to meet on a Sunday, it's hard to be those kinds of things. And back in the day, sometimes people don't have this kind of vision of the first century church. But the first century church met in houses, yes, but they weren't holes in the wall. They were big houses with big courtyards in the middle where there were patrons who could welcome people who had been converted. And so, for example, you think about Paul and Philippi with Lydia. Lydia is a rich woman who opened her house to the apostles so that they could have the church. And if she was able to do that, it's because she had the resources and the means to do it. And that is a great blessing from God. And it's always been the case. It's never been the case that those kinds of people were absent from the gospel dynamic or from the gospel ecosystem. And so I just think it's great to remind yourselves of that. And it also kind of gives great dignity to the people who God has blessed materially and with resources to be able to say, this is why. This is why God has blessed us like this, so that we can be generous. Yeah. And so we can open up our house so we can help everybody to participate in the massive hospitality that is just another reminder of the great hospitality that God has for us in Christ.
So to our listeners with large houses, we invite you to email podcast@fellowshipdenver.org, and we will host a Vision for Life party at your house.
There we go.
And we will invite others who don't listen to the Vision for Life podcast and who are part of our church, maybe we'll invite them as well
Do a live
to your
podcast.
house. Autumn, we'll set it up.
Exactly.
And I think this will be great. I like this idea a lot.
Yeah. And this is, according to Philip, a picture of the kingdom.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
Yeah, the way this works.
Yeah, absolutely right.
All right. We'll I'll let you know, Hunter, if we get any of those emails in the coming days. So much of the work of church planting, as I've listened to Hunter and now many different people describe it, is when you move to a place. So when you moved to the Fifth, is just getting to know people.
That's right.
Taking time, getting to know your neighbors, getting to know the people around you. And Hunter was telling me that you do, for instance, you walk your dog.
That's right.
In the same place
Philip's
at the
dog
same
walking
time.
ministry is impressive.
In the same place and the same time every day.
right.
But that has been actually one of the ways that you've gotten to know people.
That's right.
So tell us a bit about that. And then I wonder, as we're listening to your story, Philip, it also makes me ask, then what are those patterns that really any of us could be attuned to and weave into the ways we live and exist in our own neighborhoods?
Yeah. So it's I walk the dog every morning. I actually walk the dog because I like walking the dog. I think that's an important thing to say. We've got a dog, he needs to be walking, and I like walking them. So it's not a kind of a fictitious thing that I do for nefarious missional purposes. You know, I'm not an undercover. I'm actually just a dog walker.
You didn't buy a dog because you saw people were walking dogs?
No, I didn't. I bought a dog because Theo said, "Dad, please can I have a dog?" I bought a dog for the same reason everybody else buys a dog, because their children say, "Please can I have a dog?" But I think that kind of authenticity is the first thing I would say. So like, it's great to be intentional about things, and I'm for intentionality, but I'm for intentionality along the lines of the things that God has put into you already, and not kind of pretending to be interested in classical music so that you can, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about God has poured into us so many different things. And one of the things he's given us is a dog. And one of the things that I do is I walk the dog. And one of the things that I do is I walk the dog is I meet people. And I love people, because people are made in the image of God. And I want people who are made in the image of God to understand a little bit more through their relationship with me what it means to be created in the image of God, and how they can recover a full and eternal relationship with God through the gospel. That's what I want to happen. And so I'm really open about who I am, what I'm doing. Most of the dog walkers have come to church at some point because they're interested in me and I'm interested in them. A few of them have come back, not very many of them. That's one of the kind of things that's true of ever. They come and they probably think that they went to church tons last year because they went once. Like it was more than all the other times.
I'll go
of the
next year. I'll go again next year.
And the church that I don't go to is Philip's church.
Yeah.
But it's like but that's one of the things. Yes, absolutely. Fill your life with things which enable you in an authentic and honest way to be in touch with people, and then to live out your life in relation with them. But a big joy for me is to walk my dog along the Seine River and to stop every morning at about 8 o'clock at this particular point, and to interact with all the people who walk their dogs at the same time. And we've met so many different people, and I've made so many good friends in that way. And so that's great. And then I also go to the gym because I want to get fit. I want to get fitter. Fit.
Yeah, get fitter and then fit. That's what happens.
At some
First
point,
you
I
get fitter
think,
and then you're fit.
yeah, I don't know. At some point, I think when all of us hit a certain age, all of that is about it not getting worse.
Okay,
really.
It's about
I'm not at that stage
Maintaining.
yet. I'm not going to.
I did Spider-Man's workout this week, and then I couldn't walk afterwards. It was like a 20-minute, a CrossFit workout. He was describing it. Tom Holland was, and I was like, "Oh, sounds great. I should do that." And then I did it, and then I limped around.
And you thought you shouldn't do that. Yeah. Anyway, so I go to the gym and I meet people at the gym too, and it's just you live out your life, and I think what I've taken to do is to kind of pray that God would allow me to have authentic, real relationships and conversations. I remember talking to an Axe 9 planter at one point, and his basic assumption was that if he met somebody, that God probably wanted to save them. Whereas my basic assumption is the opposite of that. It's super unlikely that God would want to save anybody, and maybe he might save one person in a million that I get to meet. And so when I heard that pastor say that, I thought, I should definitely flip my expectations and assume that because God has prepared good works for me to walk in, that as I walk in my life, that God is preparing me to meet people, and that he probably wants to bless those people because he's blessed me. And so I should have a mindset that as I live my normal life, God will use my normal life and the normal moments of it, dog walking moments of it, to bless people and ultimately to bless them eternally. So that's kind of what I would say to the whole dog walking thing.
Well, I wonder, Philip, in this season, so from 2022, when this kind of idea began for this church plant, and then to this point now, when you're almost a year in, what has this season required of you in terms of your faith and this decision to follow God into the next thing that he had for you and Rachel and your family?
Yeah. I'll tell a story and then I'll try to weave something out of the story. When I was talking about the church plant to somebody in the sending church, she was 25 or so, and we'd just been talking about the church plant from the front. Maybe it was an announcement, I can't remember what. And she was talking to me afterwards about the church plant. And I said, well, one of my dreams for the 5th. And she said, oh, that's beautiful. And I said, what's beautiful? I hadn't said anything yet. She said, at your age, to have dreams. And I thought, I'm only 53. Please give me a break. But her point was that people at my age are normally trying to wind down and trying to find easier ways to accommodate life and be less on the front edge or whatever. But in fact, what Rich and I kind of came to understand as we processed all of this is that a lot of the things that we've done in the past have prepared us for this moment. And this is probably the last big project that God has for us. And so we want to give it everything that we've got. We want to leave it all out there. And so just working out how we, as a couple, and as a family, and as a church, and as individuals, how we pray, how we expect the Spirit to work, how we expect the gospel to work. Rachel is great because she's a very dissatisfied, discontented church planter's wife because she wants to see many more people come to faith. And that's the kind of discontentment that I really like. Because she's not satisfied to see dribs and drabs. She's not satisfied to see the gospel progress slowly. She believes that God wants to save people. She believes that God can save people. She believes that the way that happens is through the gospel. And she wants to see it happen more and more and more. And so essentially what we're trying to do is to take the brakes off or just go for it. And if we're wrong, and if it so happens that that's not what God wants to do, well, at least we'll have tried to put ourselves out there and to do everything that is humanly possible, everything that God asks us to do in terms of the means of grace, in terms of the ways in which we structure things, in terms of the risks that we take, in order to see what God will do. And we're happy for him to do whatever he wants to do. We're not trying to manipulate God or to force his hand. But essentially it's an exercise in being foolish for the gospel and not holding back and not hiding behind different expectations of what normally happens in France or what could happen or whatever. But essentially just to say, okay, you say that you want to save people, you say that it's the gospel is the power of God for the salvation of all who believe, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. You say that it's through the preaching of the gospel and through prayer. You say it's through community and through witness. You say it's through love. Okay, well, let's do all of that with as much humility and as much confidence and ambition as we can. And let's hope and pray and see what God will do. So I think essentially that's the tonality of what we're trying to do. In some senses, the gathering of a crowd and the kind of general preaching in a church or the keeping things going isn't that challenging. You know, there can be challenges, but it's if you've got a certain number of things sorted out, then you could open a church and keep it going. But that's not what we want to do. We want to be involved in an evangelistic movement of God to see people all through the faith come to Christ in such a way that will make a difference to people's lives and to the faith itself and to the image of what people might think the gospel is and the church can be. And so I think that's what we're about.
In terms of your church itself, and at this age of being almost a year in now, what are some of the growing pains that you're experiencing? And then also, how can we, particularly at Fellowship, as one of your supporting churches, what are specific things we can pray for your church plant right now? And one of the things you just said was to see the gospel advance, to see a gospel movement. So praying for the fifth and this area of Paris that you are praying for and working to reach. We can definitely join you in prayer for that. But then also, how can we pray specifically for the church?
I was saying to Hunter, we're planning our first church retreat at the end of September. And so during that church retreat, essentially what we're going to be doing is going to be calling all the people who've been coming to the church and who've been calling our church home for the last while. We're going to be calling them to commitment. You've got your 20-year anniversary and you're calling people to the first love and to recommit and to move forward in that. And so essentially that's what we're doing, but kind of for the first time. Membership and giving and commitment and service and what it looks like to be an active member of the church. So we're going to be going away at the end of September for those reasons. And so my hope is that at the end of that church weekend away, we'll be really clear on what we're trying to do. And people will not only be enthused and envisioned for that, but committed. And that God would bind us together for that reason. There's a book called Team of Teams that I read a while back. And essentially what I'm hoping to see emerge on the other end of that church retreat is the birth of a whole bunch of different people committed to working in their realm of competence and expertise for the advancement of the gospel. And so seeing people galvanized and empowered to serve is kind of what it's all about.
Well, it's been really fun to partner with you in this, and partnering for us has just mainly been supporting and cheering for what you're doing and helping make it happen. The picture of that flat is the beginning of that. I remember like our church wanted to help you get into that flat, and other churches came along too to help with that because we knew the value of you being right there. And I can even remember walking into it the first time I visited you and seeing where you had landed. And I was just struck by God's kindness that I could open up my bedroom, Theo's bedroom window, and look at the gates of the Sorbonne, which is like part of the population you really wanted to reach. And just to see the strategicness and to think there has not been a gospel preaching pastor living in this neighborhood in a long time.
That's right.
And now you have a space there, and it's a place that others are coming, and it's beautiful. So thanks for just being a great example to us. And if anything, the benefit of the partnership for us has just been being inspired by and learning from your example.
Oh, well, thank you. So as I say, thank you for everything you've been doing and everything you're continuing to do, and look forward to what the future holds.
Philip, thank you for spending time with us today and sharing this story about your family and about the church plant there in Paris. It is exciting to partner together and to pray together for gospel advancement there in Paris, here, and around the world. To those of you listening, if you have a big house, you're supposed to email us. So just a reminder at the close of the podcast here. But as always, if you have a question, a suggestion about what you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast, or a question related to today's episode, you can email us at podcast@fellowshipdenver.org anytime. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.